a person that we call the Australian bush people. I mean, the South African bushman in the Kalahari region, not the Australian, but in southern Africa, in the Kalahari region, you have the so-called bush people, and that these people have the genetic material that is diversified enough to have been the unit that became the parent group for everybody else in the world.
So once again, this woman would have been how old now?
250,000 years old.
At
now,
least.
just by way of comparison, the oldest Homo sapiens sapiens bones that we find in Europe are about 40,000 to 50,000 years old. This is the Grimaldi skeletons that were found in the Grimaldi cave.
So you have the African, how long ago now?
You have the African at least 200,000 years before they moved to the European continent.
And the European comes on the scene when?
Well, the African comes on the scene in Europe approximately 50,000 years ago. In other words, the first European was an African too, and is still an African. It's just an African who has changed.
And once again, what happened to that African once he got to Europe?
Well, you had several ice ages and a change in environment, and the theory is that the change in environment, and especially the ice age part of it, being cut off from the African continent, having a completely different environment with respect to diet and climate and all those things, resulted over a 20,000 year period in physical changes, genetic mutations to adapt to that particular environment. And about 20,000 years or so ago, we have changes sufficient that we look and see distinct people when they really aren't distinct in that sense, in the sense of having groups that can't interbreed. That's what one of the biological definitions of race is, that groups can't, a dog and a cow can't have offspring, so they would be different strains. But varieties of the same family, so that the European that resulted was merely a depigmented African.
Okay, let's go on.
Okay, if you notice, all these fossils that I was talking about, and this is just a sample of some of them, are located in Africa, mainly in the same place. They all are located with their center around Lake Victoria or Lake Nyanza. And so you'll see that they're in Ethiopia, they're in Tanzania, they're in Uganda, down in Mozambique, and so forth. These are the places, but mostly in Kenya and Tanzania. These are the richest fossil finds. But I'm trying to show that they're tightly packed together in one place, and that's all of the types are generally, you would say that they had their home in the equatorial region of Africa. And then later they moved northward down the Nile Valley. Remember, the Nile is about 4,000 miles long. And so that was literally a highway down which these populations over various times migrated. At least 3 of them migrated far enough to leave the African continent.
Okay.
Okay, so far what we've talked about is the defamation of African people and examples of that. Then we've talked about the origin of the human family, which brings us to really what is the most important part, because early man, let's say early man and modern man being found in Africa by itself has very little meaning for most of the things that we're concerned about, which has to do with what some people call civilized behavior. So what we want to know, though, is when did human beings begin to develop high civilizations, and who were these human beings that did that? It turns out that Africans were, according to the records that we have now, the ones who first developed the elements of high civilization. And that's what we'd like to look at right now, which is the story of high civilization in the world, which is also the beginning of civilization on the African continent. Okay, let me come, before we go to that particular slide.
We go to the card here?
Yeah, let me go to the card, and I'd like to explain what we'll be talking about over the next few minutes. This is a time chart of that period of the development of recorded civilization. What this means is that something was happening before 4000 BC. We're going to pick up the story right around in here. But even before 4000 BC, according to ancient African oral records, things were going on as far as 25,000 BC. They say that the age of one of their nations goes back that far. But we're just going to confine ourselves to the records that exist and not merely to oral testimony. And so to do that, we're going to look at a timeline that starts back here, let's say around 4000 BC, comes all the way up to the present. And let's see what was happening in the world and put some things that we know next to some things that we may not know about. This side is Africa, and this side is Asia and Europe. Okay? In Africa, the oldest nation that we find, and also in the world, because there are no nations over here that are this old, the oldest nation in the world is in Ta Seti, or was named Ta Seti, land of the bow. And it's located in Nubia, under the waters of the Aswan Dam. Now, this Ta Seti is covered when they built the Aswan Dam. United Nations Educational and Cultural Organization, with the cooperation of the United States and several other nations, rescued the artifacts by digging in the graves and everything, and pulled up bodies and pottery and what have you, enabling us to discover that long before Egypt, or Kemet, which starts as a nation here, long before Kemet, you had another nation, Nubia, which is the parent of Kemet. So that 3500 BC to about 3100 BC, you had Kemet in operation. And the physical description of the kings of Ta Seti, the physical description of them, is that they are tall and that they have Negroid appearance. Their bodies were found. And they were located in Nubia, which has always been the home of black African population.
And the Nubians still exist?
Nubians still exist.
Would you describe them for us, please? You were in Egypt recently.
Probably the darkest people in Africa are Nubians, anywhere on the continent. Even when you go down into southern Africa, they become more brown-skinned. But when you get to that part of Kenya, in parts of Ethiopia, but especially in Nubia, you have a very, very dark population.
And they created what now?
This is Ta Seti. Everything, all the evidence shows that that was the population of Ta Seti.
Which is older than
Egypt. Older than Egypt.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, now we have Egypt, 3100 BC, and we have 12 dynasties. These are 12 families. We have it grouped this way for a very special reason. That was the first nation that most people knew about in the world. And for the first 1,000 years of Kemetic existence,
or Egyptian
existence. So Kemet is Egypt, except that the old Egyptians never called their country Egypt. They called it Kemet. So we call it Kemet to refer to the old civilization. So if you say Egypt, you're really talking about the new civilization, which is mainly Arabic, which is a foreign population, just like the European population is in America now. But they weren't here 10,000 years ago.
The people who are in Egypt now are...
They are people who came from Syria, Assyria, even Persia and places like that, and mixed with Nubian populations. So they're mainly a foreign population.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The 12 families, 1 through 12, go from 3100 BC up to about 2000 BC. What's important about that is all the pyramids were built during that period. All the major pyramids were built during that period, and no invaders had conquered an African country in the record. There's no record of invaders having conquered Africa from outside, which means that all the pyramids were built by native Africans, and most of the main pyramids were built at the first part of this family, in what we call the Old Kingdom, dynasties 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's when most of your pyramids were built. So that when you get down here to dynasty 11 and 12, which is the Middle Kingdom, see, this would be Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. This is when you read Egyptian history.
Now, when you say pyramid, some people might not have an appreciation for that structure. We're talking about a structure that's 48 stories high.
You're talking about the Great Pyramid, and that was one of the first pyramids, by the way. The